the term genocide, I think, is loaded nowadays, and I personally wouldn't call this a genocide. I do think it's political persecution, but I don't know. I don't know what you guys think. Do you guys have a take on whether or not it's genocide?
I think you're right that when you use the term genocide, we have like a historically accurate use of the word. But ever since, obviously, Israel and Palestine, anyone that is anti-Israel, they're always saying that it's genocide. And it's like, well, is it really? And now, in this case, I think you're kind of having the counter to that. Now, I know completely different situations, but there is an actual term. I think definitions do matter. And having people that are persecuted or hunted because of their ethnicity does fall in that term of genocide. So, whether or not you say, how many hundreds of thousands or millions of people have died in South Africa, it's not a genocide. I think that that's actually not what's at the heart of the issue. It's, are people specifically being targeted with policies from a government that allows someone to be killed for no other reason other than the fact that they are this ethnicity or this group? I think that's what is happening in South Africa. Now, whether you're looking at the Uyghur Muslims, and there's so many other groups that actually have been targeted by the government. That's why I honestly don't think that calling what's happening in Gaza a genocide is the same, because they're not specifically just trying to go after people that are of Palestinian descent. They're trying to go after Hamas, and it's terrible, and I don't like any innocent life that is lost. But I do think that there's going to be this back and forth where the left is like, oh, so you can call this a genocide, but you won't call this a genocide. And I just think, again, President Trump and what he did to President of South Africa, Ramaphosa, he kind of had him stuck, because he's like getting him to acknowledge, look at all the things that are happening. And Trump, I think, was careful to say, like, I'm not going to say it's this term, but let's hear what people from South Africa have to say, and kind of letting the story tell itself. But I think, again, if you look at the actual term of genocide, it's targeted action going after specific groups that is supported by the government for no other reason other than they are the specific ethnic group.
Yeah, I mean, Brett, you were talking earlier about the definition of genocide and whether or not this meets the standard. Mm-hmm. You can't deny that it's political persecution. You have people being removed from their land, expropriation of property, and historically those types of things lead to, if they don't lead to genocide, they definitely have led to terrible, terrible oppression.
Well, yeah, I think the most interesting part of it is that, with American politics now kind of being a spectator sport, it becomes a bunch of people discussing whether the terminology fits the crime. And a lot of times I find that in a lot of ways ends up kind of watering down the horror of it all in a lot of cases, because it's a lot of us, whether it's even on here in a way, when you're discussing it on a show like this, or if you're talking about it on X, the people, at least what I saw from the clip from CNN, was them going after the terminology they're using, but they're doing that as a way of obfuscating the discussion that's supposed to be had, which is about what's actually happening there. And that's kind of a microcosm of how I see politics these days, which is everybody argues without actually knowing. There's no shared terminology for anything anymore, and you're talking past each other, and very little gets accomplished because everybody's using their own language, their own ends, and I find a lot of it to be very annoying.
Well, here's the thing. I think we also have to recognize
it's nothing this parliament can do.
Like, we have to recognize that in the current political environment, with both sides being so polarized, they're going to kind of stick to the thing that they think is going to help give them, a place to stand politically to be able to make a move or an action. And because we're becoming highly we've had this whole racial identitarian thing that's been kind of popping up again, kind of like a counter to Black Lives Matter. I think you're seeing a tendency of the right to want to glom onto things that are quote unquote pro-white. That's my perspective. I'm not necessarily against calling out when bad things happen, but as an American citizen, that, like, I genuinely say this, like, my heart goes out to people that suffer anywhere in the world. But as an American citizen, why should I care about a genocide that's happening in South Africa or a genocide that's happening anywhere if it's not American interest?
Yeah.
And I'll be honest, I really don't, from, like, again, a strategic United States perspective, I don't really care that much.
Yeah. So it's you got something to say?
I was gonna say, I agree with you about the pro-American part, but as a human being, it kind of sucks to watch countries overseas getting
That's because
so many
the-
people killed as a human being. You know what I mean?
That's because the internet has forced you
Yeah.
to now have access to all that information all the
Yeah.
time. Human beings were not designed for that.
100%. I was actually gonna say something very similar. We aren't designed. We haven't evolved to be able to process the amount of suffering that we have access to view nowadays.
Yeah.
Like if you lived in a village, or in a some kind of small tribe or whatever, 1,000 years ago, you might see you might see a war, you might see a slaughter in your tribe, but you most likely wouldn't see that kind of stuff happen like on a day. You'd be plenty familiar with death. I don't want people to misunderstand what I'm saying, because there was a lot more death. Babies died, in birth, women died in childbirth. You'd be more familiar with death, but that kind of horror of like slaughter of people en masse, that kind of stuff you didn't see if you were a tribal person so much, unless you ran into another tribe or went into war. And so the phenomena of like slaughtering people is in the way that we see it today, where it's constantly fed to you through the internet or even through television. Like that wasn't the norm.
Thanks for checking out this clip from Timcast IRL. Make sure to watch the show live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. Subscribe to this channel, and we will see you all there.